So we're going to resume now with Professor Carlos Oliva Mendoza, who is a writer and a philosopher at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM, Faculty of Philosophy of Letters, as well as a member of the National System of Researchers. Among other recognitions, he is the recipient of the International Award as Siglo XII, the National Award for Young Essay, and the National Award for Literary Essay. He is the lead for the research projects Critical Theory in Latin America and Baroque, Modernity, and Mexican Thought. His latest published books are Cine, mexicano y filosofía, Espacio y capital, Semiótica y capitalismo. And I don't speak Spanish, so I'm sorry for saying that so poorly. But please join me in welcoming Carlos Mendoza.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Julia. Thank you for the invitation. I'm a little bit dizzy because I have a very, very hard flight, so any problem with my words or pronunciation, just let me know. I'm going to do about capitalism some critique, and I'm going to show some graphics and then get back. I'm going to read a little bit, and I hope don't to go more than 30 minutes to have a little bit of discussion. I think the important question for the critical theory is this: what is the main source of surplus value extraction? I think if we focus in this question, we can understand what are the forms of resistance and the forms of capitalism is working every day. And I think it's clear now that the main source is not really the work, it's not really the exploitation. I think for this reason it's becoming very important another part of the world, because we have a more complex observation of how is coming the surplus value for a different scales and different levels. So I think if we read and we came back to the main book of Marx, it's clear that the technology of capital is in three grades, and it's interacting always, commodity and commodity, commodity, money and commodity, and it's the first capitalisms, century 16, century 17. I think for this reason it's so important the capitalisms around the world now, because we are getting back to these forms of primitive capitalisms. Money that is generating money, credit capitalisms, capitalismo de usura in Spanish. And we have the classical element that is just always in the 19th century, the beginning of 20th century, and I think it's becoming the capitalism of war now, is where is Europe, United States, some part of Asia is putting all the rest of the really serious industrial capitalisms. So these three forms, mercantile, industrial, and credit capitalisms. My thesis is that we are becoming again in a extraction central about mercantile and credit capitalisms now. If we think in this graphic and in this one, we can go forward, we can think how is the surplus and mercantile devices in capitalisms. It's clear that this device, the first one, is a gender device. It's very clear now about the domestic work, the domestic labor, the role that is playing in the capitalisms. So when we have these capitalisms operating in society, we have a plus value that is operating in gender schematizations. This is the classic form, no? The industrial capitalism. That is the working classes, the social classes, no? The struggle of the classes. But this is not the focus right now of the capitalisms around the world. And we are back into the extractivism and dispossession in this original accumulation. No? That this is no original accumulation, it's a constant accumulation inside the capitalisms. So I think if we think in the main source of the plus value, we can think that it's becoming back the main source of the 16th and 16th century. No? And it's a very thesis that is working now in a lot of theories. No? It's becoming a neo-feudal capitalism, they say. No? But it's pretty obvious now that the plus value is generating in these spheres, and we need to engross this, but it's almost impossible to engross this part of capitalism around the world. More interesting even is this device have a significant inside the sociality of capital, but they can change the meaning. They can change the meaning. See? One is the significant, but if we can put another meaning aquí, another meaning aquí, no? We can put, for example, Asian capitalisms, no? Maybe very soon. No? Another meaning, and we can to change this movement. So if we have a device of gender, the classic significant is the patriarchate, but the meaning is the man. But it can to be changed, you know, in the future. You know? Can to be another material subject operating in this device on commodity, money, commodity. You know? The same in this and the same in this. So for this is quite interesting, this meeting, because if we are in a pluricentric world, it doesn't mean the original accumulation is not working anymore. No? It's working in a different levels, no? With different strategies. No? And quite interesting is that we have a device, no? That needs engarcing, no? Putting together all this team, that is the racial device of the modernity. And this device is the blanquitude, no? The famous thesis from Weber, no? The spirit of the capitalism in Western. No? This is the great device that is like a fine thing. It's putting together all this. No? And it's not properly the whiteness. No? It's not the blancura, no? The white man. It's properly the ethical movement of the capital, like a religious, no? Like a religious, that a working religious, no? Is that, no? Is that? Well, I'm going to try to work a little bit, not so much, about the critique. I'm going to start with a quote from Walter Benjamin. Said Walter Benjamin, what in the end makes advertisement so superior to criticism? What? What is so superior? The publicity that the critic, no? Says, asking Walter Benjamin. And Walter Benjamin answer, not what the moving red neon sign says, no? But the fiery pool reflecting in the asphalt. It's not a clear answer, obviously. No? What does it mean? No? What does it mean? Well, maybe he's meaning that the advertising, that publicity is really reflecting, no? The movement of the capitalisms. And maybe the critique no. Maybe the critique no. Maybe this is a paradox here. Well, The first subject is critique and commodities. Critique in public life is a fact that is neither primary nor simple. Can warn of the need to keep critical discourse from the public sphere, and at the same time of the need to form a critic via reading, communicating it privately to the sovereign or whoever holds power. Critique in this sense acquires the character of counsel, of advice, but also of servitude. It has a precise limit, the exercise of power, which is in a sense forbidden to the critic. Its elasticity always depends of the space set it by authority. In the best case, the space and times that can be negotiated with whoever is the ruling power. Otherwise, power eliminates the virus of critique either by extermination, persecution, imprisonment, disappearance, or simple silence. This last option is the most common way of eliminating critique. The others are exemplary and paradigmatic force of the extreme silence enforced by the sovereign. Silence is not a trivial fact. It depends on possessing and controlling communication technologies and always encrypting a message by constituting and constructing as a commodity. In this way, even if the message is public, it has no chance of causing a crisis in the power of capital, so that it cannot constitute another pole of domination, or if anything, it becomes integrated in a sophisticated form of silence and repression to the dynamics of the power. So this is the idea. The critic is properly a commodity. So, in basic coordinates, critique is linked to a world in which the central phenomenon is a commercial exchange and modern tone systems. In extremics, critique is a central part of deployment of capital. It is a power and anomaly typical of modern capitalisms. Hence, its marginal, anachronistic, defeat appearance, but also hence, throughout the order critical construction, historical time, its centrality, its constantly future occurrence, its victory. Critical theory is a restless jewel of capitalisms, a goldsmith product of modernity. Romantic critique. Romanticism is a multifaceted event that runs throughout the story and even gestation of modernity. Its guiding lines are Christian theology and the constant formation and destruction of national structures. There is no great difference between the creation and collapse of nation and the first imaginary migrant planetary community that established the ecclesia of the patriarchal Christian assembly. The fact that this community was not at first established as a cosmopolitan society is owing to the industrialization suffered by mercantile capital in the 16th and 17th century. It's especially owing to the small global industry that could diagram a subsequent industry, the press. The process of industrialization of linguistic and thought configuration via books and their legality is so rapid that the subsequent result is, as Benedict Anderson keenly observed, the establishment of nations, a decisive event in humanity romantic history. Critical discourse, just nearly, loyally subject to the printing press and the incredible journal around the planet made by books and other realms, fragments and bundles of sheet music, diaries, wills, games, bills of exchange, confessional grammar books, cooking recipes, assembly instruction, not to mention too much late establishment of the newspaper and radio. This is the natural magma, its reference material, and its place of formal and even self-critical deployment. Nevertheless, such is power in history, and the constitution of a space, undoubtedly the most important being the city and the invention of the urban life, that romantic critical discourse is sedimented in the national state and even ecclesiastical structure in a kind of assembly of experts, technicians, and scientists. The internal dialectic that this critical discourse proposed, subject to its truth in technology, was for many decades the dialectic between revolution and justice. Modern critical discourse was balanced on this pairing. Nevertheless, its output was always industrial, to offer the production of a revolutionary subject with a basis in reason, that which was radical referred to a revolutionary consciousness, whether proletarian or bourgeois. This was always fatality referred in the national form in political terms of the exercise of national sovereignty, in which the common good could achieve well-being and justice within the borders of national territory. Critical discourse thus neglected a central issue already present among theories of the 19th and early 20th centuries. This is, capitalism has an expanded form of reproduction, a planetary status that, through the commodification of life and the permanent violent accumulation of wealth, subordinates nation and state to a central dynamics. This amounts to pulling capital above any principle of justice, as channeling every revolutionary act into the internal logic of production, distribution, and consumption of commodities. In this scenario, romantic critique has found its ultimate commercial niche in the cultivation of printed discourse, academic globalization, and counsel to the prince. Is there another way of understanding critical discourse? Baroque critique. Critique has its central value in the cultivation of the commodity form, an historically modern behavior focusing on commerce and credit, a question of force and fate that is the Baroque world. Naturalized as the insurmountable form of sociality, the commodity form nevertheless maintains within it an essential secret. It is intertwined with a use that depends on one of the multiple natural forms contained in matter. The sum assault involved in the realization of a commodity, it is sale, and this depends, however tenuously, on a need, wherever natural or artificial. It is a need that breaks the sphere of value and its critical constitute in use, be it in alienated, destructive, rational consumption, or even in the counterfactual use of wealth, as in Baroque universe. The material form underlying every commercial project of dream has an internal development that always constitutes a critical line against the universe of capital accumulation and against the bourgeois economy. In this Baroque fact, wherein consumption is transmuted into waste in the face of accumulation and covertly into the true expansion and participation of natural wealth. There, the Baroque threatens, plays with, and parodies the civil economy of capital societies. The long-term spatial strategy, the primary sphere of circulation that maintains, recreates, and develops all Baroque phenomena, is the elemental sphere of simple exchange between commodity and commodity. Even though it already contains the embryo of monetary forms, the multiple possibilities of credit, the alienation and everything as a commodity, and the drift of exploitation and mercantile meta-production that configures industrial capitalism models, it managed to establish forms of resistance and a space of counterflow to the accumulation of capital. The resistance focused on exhausting the abstract and social process of work in itself and not allowing the monetary commodity, money and credit, to embed socially necessary work in the industrial process of commodity production. In Marx works, and I am quoting, as far as concerns its material content, the movement is commodity, the exchange of one commodity for another, the metabolic interaction of social labor, in whose result the process itself becomes extinguished. Precisely for this reason, the Baroque is conservative, traditionalist, and, in a sense, anti-revolutionary, since it focuses its elements of resistance of the modern mercantile fact or barter, a form always projectile subsumed by the industrial capital. Nevertheless, this complex, borderline, fetishist, and even suicidal strategy allows the Baroque form a much more powerful experimentation with modernity and natural forms than romantic or classical forms of resistance against capital, an experimentation that techno-capitalism constantly represses or subsumes. Perhaps the clearest 21st century examples in this public emergency of indigenous peoples in the face of the representative politics of the Enlightenment, which have inflicted exorbitant damage of human beings and the natural universe. In this context, Baroque critique based on the commercial barter relationship, commodity by commodity, bears established metaphysical and epistemological aspects. So, as you can see, the central point is to say that the point of resistance, I think, right now, is experiment into the capital, this possibility of relation, just to put it, to stop the process of accumulation. I think if the central of the social relation is the commodity form, this central relation, and we can see all around the world, even in Europe, how when we stress and densify this form, we put the money in a kind of parenthesis, in a kind of gap. And this is the form of resistance that is becoming, I think, right now. And this is not new. This is the forms of resistance in the 16th and 17th century, when the capitalism is really pre-industrial capitalism. That's all.
Wonderful. That puts us right on time for having plenty of time for questions. So I'll open the floor immediately. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. That was great. I was, reminded of Bolivar Echeverria's, Baroque writings on Baroque and Romantic ethos. That you made it clear in this context, which was the context of so-called primitive accumulation in Marx, and which is very interesting. But he also thought that romantic ethos sort of denied the contradictions of capitalism, and sort of found a spiritual justification in the self-valorizing value, while at the same time as you referred to it, that became alienated, as the self-valorizing, value embodied in commodity form, like it became alienated at the same time, but a sort of a denial and, maybe disavowal. Whereas this Baroque ethos was indeed a strategy of resistance, as you said, in the sense that in colonial cities, especially in Mexico, it was a resistance against, sort of fading into barbarism after conquest, that while you couldn't go back to some distant past, some glorified past, but instead of becoming, resentful, Baroque ethos was about this recreation of European civilization by the indigenous people. I don't know, you call them mestizos? Mestizos. A form of creative reproduction, a creative repetition, or a total reinvention of the European ethos, a form of a kind of translation that is not translation. It actually transfigures and transforms the original. What do you think about that? Do you think there are similarities between?
Quite a lot, yeah. Bolivar Echeverria was my teacher.
Wow.
Was my teacher.
How lucky you.
I was. And one problem with the Echeverria theory is that usually people think that it's a cultural theory, and I think in the base is a reconstruction of Marx, a new proposal of Marx, similar to Cogin Karatani in one sense, because Cogin Karatani is saying that it's backing the interchange for redistribution and reciprocity. And he said there's no commodity in the reciprocity.
Because he's a Kantian, so he sort of mixes Kant with
the natural form and the power, just the raw power in the state power. And Echeverria don't say that, but Echeverria said the unique form of to resist, because it's so tragic and so strong, the conquest, that is no another way to resist. Like a lot of parts of the world, the extractivism, the accumulation, the disposition is so strong that the strategy is a very peculiar strategy. Podigophagia, say Echeverria, Phagocytan, take the code, take the code and do a new recreation of Europe. But Echeverria as well say this new recreation is not peculiar for Latin America. He said it's the recreation for Italia in 16th century. It's the Baroque recreation against the Renaissantist. So it's not just in Latin America. In Latin America it's quite strong because the genocide process is, for Echeverria, just comparable with the Nazis process. It's those historical genocides in the world. But it's very similar, it's very similar. So, what did you say is better than I am saying that. But I think why it is remarkable is that the Baroque is an economic movement about the try to interchange commodities and putting always a stop to the money, to the accumulation. That is I think that is the core of the proposal. Exacerbate this interchange to put the money no inside the process, no inside the process. No.
Thank you for this. This is very interesting. It's very neat, but I think I'd like just to kind of figure out more the messy part. If it's so, and also, I mean, thanks for explaining to me my anxiety about why I like Baroque aesthetics, because I'm always there has to be an anxiety. So I mean, I wanted to ask about the, so are you saying, maybe it's a clarification, so that you're saying that is Baroque critique the critique that is posited from the side of gender politics within the kind of, within the kind of circle, whatever, of surplus accumulation? And then, so my question is there, I mean, obviously gender, can you put next to it race as well or not? Is there a difference to be made there? You had some other formulation. Yeah, I mean, maybe just to say more about this. And I guess, what do you think about this notion of, because there's so much work that's been done on surplus population, because that is something that you can imagine and think about, I don't know, on a globally expansive scale, and also in a sense that even for Marx, surplus population is nothing. It's not just about the external migrant refugee. These are all abstract categories. It's generated from within the very urban center of capital. Capital produces surplus populations as soon as its circuit of production is put to work, right? So I mean, the question is, how would you map out the question of surplus population on surplus value, and where would you put it in the schema? Because, it gets kind of messy there and complicated, because surplus populations are unwaged, generally they're precarious, they're also very much gendered, it's feminized labor, it's labor of care, affect, sentiment, all this kind of stuff, right? I mean, it's just what would your reaction be to kind of bringing that category into the equation here?
I think great of the criticism on Marx now is because he's doing a political work, no? He's doing a political work, and he's trying to speak from the working classes, that is the subject that can do that, the revolution in the 19th century. And José Echeverría said, what is not working in the capital is the value, the use value, because the use value is contact with the natural form, not with the artificial form of the change value. And if we work in the use value, we can show that this capitalism is working here, like in chapter 5, when Marx said all the cities becoming a fabric, all the cities becoming the fabric work, because the girls are there, the boys are there, the woman is there, and now it's obviously quite clear now, because we are becoming back to this kind of plus value. So I think this surplus of population is always there, but it's always there. But when you have a schematization of industrial capitalism, the patriarchal industrial, like Marx said, is not working properly. It's not working properly. So when you put out the industrial capitalism and you become in this kind of world that we have now, works without rights, without vacation, without the salary, when we put it out this form, this becoming again, and this surplus population is properly the labor population, and it's always there. It's always there. For this reason, when you engross this part, all this becoming one part of this, and this is regulating all the system. But when you lose this part, it's becoming again this strong capitalism, or real capitalism, like John Kraneusta says, the real history of capitalism is in Latin America. Because in Latin America is working this every day, In Europe, 19th century, 20th century, we have this, but this is not the world capitalism. This is a very specific part of capitalism. It's impossible in Mexico to close the roads in a working movement, because it's no salary, it's no propia credito, it's no lands to live, in France is possible, no? Because the working class is working there. No? So, hope to clarify a little bit. No? And about the romantic thing, I think the important thing with the romantic criticism is that after the revolution is becoming a kind of institutionalization, the state of the nation. No? And when you do this movement, no? When you do this movement, you accumulate power and accumulate money again. No? So I think it's one of the paradox of the Romanticism, that it's not a permanent revolution. It's impossible. You have to go to the state, no? And you have to go to the nation, to the myth of the nation. No? And in this moment, you recreate again the spirit of the accumulation. No?
So the disaccumulation doesn't exist there? Like this primitive or original accumulation is also a form of, dispossession, as it's negative accumulation, as Marx says, a form of disaccumulation. So that doesn't exist.
For this reason, I think the new thesis of the feudal capitalism is not right. No, it's not right. Capitalism is always a feudal social kind of life, always, always. So now a lot of people are saying, we are in a feudal capitalism. No. In Latin America, in Africa, in parts of Asia, always was a feudal capitalism. And it's a structural, this feudal capitalism, to industrial capitalism. That is Europe, the United States, and some part of Europe and United States. In the other rest of the world is the real capitalism, no? So, an atavic capitalism.
We have two questions. Can you, Andres, of course?
Yes, thanks, Carlos, for the talk. I wanted to ask about the relation between resistance, Baroque resistance, and credit.
Yeah.
Because, there's increasing concern, I guess, over the last 4 or 5 decades about the way in which every part of the accumulation process, every element within the accumulation process is becoming functionally dependent upon credit, right? It's every process of accumulation, every strategy of accumulation is mediated by credit in one sense. And this has very specific effects on politics.
Yeah.
Both, in a more kind of localized setting, but also at the level of the nation state. Right? This idea that capital autonomizes itself, becomes a global force, which is able to, if you like, subordinate political processes by just taking money away. So could you say something about that?
And not just political process, the life. The new life is credit, debt, rent. This all the applications is Airbnb, Uber, Booking. That's quite interesting because we don't need the commodity. We need the platform for the commodity. So we are in capitalism, and the commodity is not working if we don't rent the platform. And when we rent, we go in immediately in the schematization of debt, rent, credit. No? And it's in the life, no? In every second day, we are in this kind of capitalism. So I think that the Baroque and I am saying the critique, the modern critique, is a fascinating commodity. We do credit, we do critique because we are very sophisticated with the commodities, with the language, with the books, with the travels. We are very sophisticated, and in this moment we do critique, and we can autocritique, and we, like Mar said, but it's impossible to stop that. No? So I think Baroque critique is part of the capital. No? And Baroque critique is always playing between simple interchange of commodities and immediately in a process of creditification. No? For this reason, the Baroque is so violent, no? And as well so destructive of the community. Because in one moment it's moving to the religious form, money that is just doing money by credit, by debt, by rent. And in this moment, the capitalist is working to the industrial capitalism, is projecting. So the 18th century, 19th century is not coming alone, it's coming because they accumulate credit in the Baroque period. The extractivism was so intensive that they can put to do science and technology to do industrial capitalism. So the Baroque is always playing in these two spheres of capitalism. And this in this context is always strong and attainable when people say, no, we need really the romantic movement, the struggle of class, to move inside the capitalism. So I think the capitalism is in a very contextual and spatial essay, and you can respond in the same way in Mexico than in England, than in Colchester, than in Liverpool. So this is part of the secret, because it's moving in these spheres. So for this reason, it's quite important, and it's another theory of Bolívar Echeverría, to try to disarticulate this sphere, the racial one, because the racial one is connecting all the other ones. So when you decide go against the man and the patriarchat, which kind of feminist is working there? No? White feminists, black feminists? No? It's always operating the ethos of the capital. When you say we are going against Europe, against United States, it's always an internal colonization, and it's not going far. This confrontation will be perfect, a real confrontation between Latin America and Europe, a real confrontation. No? All the governments say, we don't going to pay the debt more. It's going to collapse here. No? It's going to collapse here. See? But it's impossible because we have inside of this periphery quite a lot of racial and colonialist forms. No? And here as well. No? And that's fine. No? And worker in France is getting more money than doctor in Ciudad de Mexico, and that's fine. No? But because the doctor, it's fine in one sense, but it's crazy in another sense. It's crazy. No? So in this moment is the blanketude operating in favor to the working class in this kind of countries. In this kind of countries. No? So for this is quite important, because he's a symbolic plus value, a social plus value, and he's a material one. No? So it's quite important to destructure this part of the capitalism, the racial form. No?
Okay, we have two more questions. Sumi, and then
Thank you so much for your talk. I suppose what I want to sort of see in your typology is the work of gender, and you've sort of said both as a material and a symbolic device and a social relation. And what I want to ask in relation to surplus value is the role of social reproduction. Because that's how Marx, for example, shows that the economy is then not a separate sphere governed by a discrete economic rationality, but actually is one which is characterized by the social functions and activities which constitute it, and so on, right? So, and therefore, social reproduction is central to how surplus value is then distributed in society. And of course, it's also one of the central ways, and capitalism is, as you know, and you've talked about it, it's only in the capitalist mode of production where the accumulation of abstract wealth becomes the basis of social reproduction, right? And that's why this matters, social reproduction matters for thinking about surplus value. But in order for this to happen, and this is where your symbolic matters, is that in order for this to become possible, a set of social relations need to be in place. And that's why Marx is so insistent on social relations and so on. And this is where Marxist feminists have been exemplary in actually being able to tease out and drawing attention to that social constitution of the economy, where surplus value occurs and the role that social reproduction plays in it. And of course, one of the ways in which that happens is because there's a split between the formal economy and life.
Yeah.
And that's how capitalism moves into that split between life and capitalist relations of production and capitalist modes of production. And that's what keeps capitalism going, because it's constantly being able to come between the two. And I wondered where surplus, so social reproduction, the work that social reproduction is, because man is not only symbolic, you see what I mean, patriarchy is not symbolic, it does particular things. But one of the really interesting things about Marx is, of course, at no point, I mean, as far as my own reading and other people's reading goes, that he actually sort of says that the identity, he doesn't designate identities of those who produce surplus, who do the work of social reproduction. Yeah. It just so happens that that patterns out. But he himself doesn't say that social reproduction patterns out on these gendered lines. And that's why the work is that's why it's so interesting, that it patterns out in that way and the work it does in surplus value.
Oh. Yeah, he said we are characters, no? Characters, no? Like in a theater.
Yeah.
Like in a theater.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that the difference is that if social reproduction is going in this point, is becoming a strong material reproduction. So the symbolic is not operating. No? The invent of the race is the invent of the industrial capitalism. And it's an invent to put the white population in a different scale. It's not an invention of the black race. It's posterior to this, almost in 18th century. The invent of the race is invent of the American industrial capitalism to separate the white population inside the working. So if we are in this scale, the social reproduction is becoming a material reproduction, and the struggle is real, is viable, is coming up. But if we are in this level of plus value, the material is becoming evanescent, say Echeverria, no? It's becoming diffuse, no? And then the symbolic form of the race is becoming stronger. Because properly, if you are not going to work, and if I'm working in a telephone, what I'm doing my symbolic identity? What I'm doing? I am doing, like Benjamin says, in the publicity, not in the real confrontation. No? And when I am in the real confrontation, I have a salary, I have a work, and I have a patron in front of me. I know how to constitute the community. I know who is the enemy. But when I am in this kind of capitalism, it's quite complex. No? And Marx is working, I suppose, in the first of the Capital, and at the end, in the volume 3, is working on this. And as well this, no? The domestic work, no? It's always a phantasmatic work, no? Phantasmatic work. So the identity is quite complex. It's a different identity than this identity.
Okay, we have time for one last question.
Yes, just a point of clarification and a question on top of that.
All right.
Clarification is, when you say that capitalism is always a failed system, do you mean in the sense that its inbuilt tendencies to implode, to have disequilibrium, or do you mean in the sense that the way in which the public sees it now? Because the public, say in the UK or the US or the EU, the frustration with capitalism has been the ever-increasing asymmetric effects, and the kind of disqualification of capitalistic logic in too big to fail, which the public see as being a kind of like an abuse of power. So in what sense do you mean? But the second question is, prior to capitalism or in a post-capitalist society, do you imagine there is a system we can actually designate which doesn't have inbuilt failure into it? Because of course Marx did not designate any specification of that. His account of socialism is nondescript.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much for your question. I think feudal in the sense of violent, and this violent is basification in that is always need to dispossession and rent. In the core of the capitalism is the rent of the land, the rent of the land. So in a primitive and progressive pattern of accumulation, I take the land, like here is the first place when los cercados, the French population goods is working quite a lot of this. The gentrification is in the 16th century. So you take the land and then you rent the land. And you go to the crisis for accumulation capital and you put the state to take the money for the population. So it's always renting. Now it's renting technology. The center now is not renting the land like in a natural feudal process. Now is renting the technology.
So it runs out of the ability to reappropriate.
Yeah, violent, always violent. So, and he has a structure of crisis, and this crisis is always finishing with a reappropriation of land, and now reappropriation of technology, reappropriation of knowledge. And the other thing, I think what we can think is not to put in the center of the social reproduction the interchange of commodities. The commodities is always to be with the human, I think, and the capitalism is always with the human, but not in the core of the social relation. If we go to a land, to a world when we can interchange no commodities, like the center of the relation, the social relation, maybe we can think in a post-capitalist world. And this is working in a lot of parts of this planet. People is no interchanging commodities, but the core of the war is interchanging commodities. The sense is about interchanging commodities and accumulate money to buy the land, the light, the energy, the platform of communication. This is the core of the center, a platform of a mercantile platform. But quite a lot of parts of the world doesn't working in this way. Not working in this way.
Okay, we have time to squeeze in one more little question. That's okay.
Well, I'm not sure if it is a question.
Okay. Better.
I find your schemes very interesting, and I think I was just trying to understand. So you said we return to a kind of primitive level of accumulation, and I was wondering if you could tell a little bit more about, like, if we return to something, it means that there's a change at the level of primitive accumulation in a sense of something. So I was wondering if you could tell a little bit more about what that change might imply in terms of the category of use, but also in terms of the accumulation. I don't know if you...
Yeah, the problem is that Karatani said since 1970 the commodity, the principal commodity of the war is the message. The plus value is generated there, and before that was the big commodity, the car, the wash machine, even the house, and before the clothes, and before the cotton. So if you have this commodity regulation, the plus value scale of the world, you need this kind of platform. You need fabric work, you need to move the cotton, you need the clothes, you need the cars. But in 1970, Karatani, like economy said, it's obvious in the plus values generating in the movement of the data. So for this reason, this platform is becoming back. It is becoming back in a really, really violent form. Because for use this, we need really quite a lot of work in industrial work, but not in this form. Not in this form. Money accumulate that is going to a commodity, then going back to a money, a plus money. We are in a process that money becoming these commodities, no, internet, rent, and this becoming immediately in connection with this, with a reification in a national money, you know, in a bank. It's becoming out, these kind of things. No? I can say that. No, thank you very much for the question. No?
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.